WPLG 715, Fireman Kenny's on the air, helping you to stay safe in a world where danger never takes a vacation. On this episode, we interview West Bend firefighters Steve Inhof and Alec Hakes about PTSD Awareness Month. Welcome back to all 13 of our loyal listeners to another installment of the Fireman Kenny Show Podcast. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or whatever platform you're listening to the show. Post-traumatic stress disorder affects large numbers of public safety personnel, with many requiring various forms of mental health treatment. The International Association of Firefighters has implemented a peer support program for their members to assist in dealing with PTSD-related issues. On this episode, we interview Steve Inhof and Alec Hakes from the West Bend Professional Firefighters IAFF Local 2025 about PTSD Awareness Month. Before we begin the podcast, we would like to mention our sponsors. For over a century, the National Fire Sprinkler Association has been advocating for a stronger industry and a safer world by promoting fire sprinklers in model codes and legislation. Their mission is simple: to protect lives and property from fire through the widespread acceptance of the fire sprinkler concept. Be sure to follow the National Fire Sprinkler Association on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can visit the National Fire Sprinkler Association website, www.nfsa.org. We would also like to thank our friends at Fire Suppression Solutions, distributor of fire suppression products for the fire service and for home use. You can follow Fire Suppression Solutions on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Now a word from Fire Suppression Solutions.
Fire can strike without warning, leaving you with precious little time to react. And if you are not prepared, the damage can be devastating to life and property. In the blink of an eye, your home or business could be on fire, with flames doubling in size every 30 seconds, leaving you helpless and unable to respond. Don't let this nightmare become a reality. That starts with being prepared. Our fire suppression products are designed to equip you with an effective response to any fire emergency, all while limiting additional damage, making you the true first responder, giving you the peace of mind that you have what you need to keep your loved ones and property safe until more help comes. Do you have a plan to respond to a fire emergency at your home or business? Protect your family, pets, and property with the tools from Fire Suppression Solutions. Contact us today and finish putting your plan into effect before it's too late.
For more information on Fire Suppression Solutions products, you can visit firess.us. The National Center for PTSD has declared June as PTSD Awareness Month. With us on this episode are Steve Inhof and Alec Hakes, IAFF peer supporters with the West Bend Professional Firefighters IAFF Local 2025. Steve and Alec, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you for having us. My name is Steve Inhof. I am a lieutenant with the West Bend Fire Department, also the Local 2025 president for the past 8 years. I am a peer support person for our peer team in the city of West Bend. I am also on the state MAP team, which is the peer support team for the state of Wisconsin.
And I'm Alec Hakes. I've been with the West Bend Fire Department now for 10 years, one of the peer team members with our local peer support team, and happy to be talking about PTSD with you, Ken.
So, Steve, June has been designated as PTSD Awareness Month. Why don't you tell our listeners let's talk about mental health issues and post-traumatic stress disorder and actually what it is.
June being post-traumatic stress or mental health awareness month, in most recent years, the fire service has been doing a better job or a more concerted effort in recognizing the long-term impacts of the nature of our job. The job that we do deals with individuals, general walk of life individuals. They call us on their worst day of their lives. We are called in to make their days better or try to help them out as much as they can. Studies are showing that this repeated exposure to this trauma is having long-term effects on the fire service. So there is a more concerted effort to address the long-term ramifications from bad calls, day-to-day work impacts, dealing with the public, budgetary issues. These are just all kinds of issues that they're discovering that have a cumulative effect on a person's psyche, and we're making a better concerted effort to try and head off a lot of those impacts.
So, Alec, we can expect any type of post-traumatic stress after any incident that can occur. It can be a stressful thing to watch somebody die or be injured or anything like that. But let's talk about post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic stress disorder.
Normally, after any critical incident, firefighters or first responders in general are going to have some sort of reaction, and that's perfectly normal. I mean, that's what we call post-traumatic stress. We consider it post-traumatic stress because it would minimally impair our daily function, and it's only one or two symptoms within the four major categories of post-traumatic stress. Again, it doesn't interfere with our day-to-day. As we move away from the incident within that first month, if we start having more impaired daily function or having more symptoms in any specific area, upwards close to 9, 10, 8 or 9, 10, that lasts anywhere from 3 days to a month. We call that acute stress disorder.
So, Steve, we talk a lot about PTSD. Why don't you explain to our listeners what post-traumatic stress disorder actually is?
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition caused by very stressful, frightening, or distressing events. And when it pertains to the fire service, what they're discovering is 20, 25, 30 years of an accumulation of stressful events are building up in the firefighters. And it has the potential to cause adverse effects when it comes to family life, work-life balance, or just your overall demeanor.
PTSD is a clinical diagnosis by a clinician, a licensed clinician. The symptoms have to be lasting longer than a month. They have to be impairing our daily functioning, and the symptoms have to be in all areas. And those areas are intrusion, avoidance, altered mood and cognition, and arousal or reactivity. Specifically, in intrusions like reliving the event. We can have intrusive memories or thoughts, distressing dreams, dissociative reactions or flashbacks, intense psychological or physical response when exposed to similar cues. So we're looking for one symptom in that area. Consider PTSD. We're also looking for one symptom in the avoiding things that remind you of the event, or the avoidance. That's avoidance of people, places, things that remind you of the event. Avoidance of feelings or thoughts associated with the event, and still potentially disrupting our normal daily functioning. The third category, which we're looking for two symptoms in, is negative emotions and thoughts, or altered mood and cognition. So this would be persistent negative beliefs about self, others, or the world, self-blame caused by this distorted beliefs about the cause of the incident, sustained negative emotional state, inability to experience positive emotions, difficulty recalling parts of the event, loss of interest in usual activity, or feeling detached or remote from others. And finally, the last category that you need to have two symptoms in would be feeling on edge, arousal, or reactivity. And those symptoms would be irritability of verbal outbursts to others or objects, reckless self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance, poor concentration, sleep disturbance, and exaggerated startled response. So again, we need to have all those things going on, and it's got to be diagnosed by a clinician.
So, Steve, you talked a little bit about how that affects later in life and affecting family issues. So what are some of the causes of the mental trauma in first responders?
Some of the incidents that over your career are serious car accidents, just death in general, anything that involves children. Children are probably one of the tougher incidents that we get exposed to, especially if you're a parent. There's times that you'll see the comparison between the child and your own children, so it has a long-term effect on your psyche. Any kind of loss of life, be it murders, suicides, serious car accidents, or just the general verbal assaults that you sometimes receive from the public for what you do.
And I also think it's important to talk about mental trauma outside of the job. PTSD, a lot of times it gets talked about with what happens to us on the job, but we're all predisposed to different things in our lives. We all carry different things that we've had happen to us from when we were kids growing up. So what we've seen outside the job also influences what happens to us. And in a way, it makes us more likely to have PTSD if you've experienced traumas outside of the job as well, either as a kid or young adult growing up. All those things that you're already carrying and what you have going on in your personal life, that still carries over to the job. And sometimes that can make our PTSD onset happen at a younger age or more prevalently. So it's important to know that you still have to take care of your personal life outside the job, because let's be honest, there's a statistic out there that firefighters see more trauma in 1 year than a civilian sees in a lifetime. So we're definitely already piling on to what we have going on our personal side.
So when we're talking about the signs and symptoms of PTSD, what can people look for not only in themselves to be self-aware if they're experiencing PTSD, but friends and family can watch for in people that they know?
Some of the symptoms you can look at even within yourself is like vivid flashbacks. If all of a sudden, quiet moment, all of a sudden you relive a certain specific trauma. Intrusive thoughts or images, when all of a sudden there again, all of a sudden you just sitting there with thinking with yourself and you go to a dark place. Nightmares, you can experience sweating, nausea, just anxiety in general, having difficulty sleeping. All that stuff is normal for when you start experiencing elevated stress levels. You can become easily upset or angry, be hypervigilant, like when referring to call with children, you'll find yourself being overly protective of your own children from that, especially if there's a very close age comparison between the traumatic event and your children. Could find it hard to concentrate. These are all very common symptoms of PTSD. It leads into anxiety, and then we can go down the rabbit hole of anxiety, and those signs or symptoms. You find yourself easily anxious, digestive issues, you upset stomach, all the way to the other extreme where all of a sudden you feel like you got to keep yourself busy rather than giving yourself the opportunity to try and deal with the moment or deal with the memories and, deal with them properly. You just want to keep yourself busy so you don't deal with it at all. So you just try to ignore it. Studies are showing that it doesn't go away. You just repress it. And historically, that's what firefighters used to do, is just suck it up and move on to the next one. You'll be fine. You can't keep pushing those feelings down. The big thing that we're dealing with in the fire service is the stigma of mental health. And when we talk about mental health, the old guard, which I include myself in, would be like, you'll be fine. Just rub some dirt on it, move through it. And talking about it is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's just talking with somebody that's been there, understands what you're going through, and making you feel that the feelings that you're feeling are perfectly normal. And that's part of the mission that we're on, is to try and make sure, especially this young generation coming in, that it's okay to realize that it's okay to feel bad about this stuff, but we need to deal with it and move on. That way we deal with it in the proper way.
I think Steve did a great job talking about the different signs and symptoms of PTSD. And I just want to reiterate, stress shows itself in many different ways amongst people. The big thing I want loved ones to know is that a lot of times we use the firehouse as our coping mechanism. It's a place where we can feel normal because we have these shared experiences with the people that we're with. It's when we go home that these signs and symptoms will manifest. So I think it's important for any loved one of a firefighter to know these signs and symptoms. And it's just any physical, cognitive, emotional, or behavioral change could be a sign and symptom of PTSD. And it's just important that you know that they may be different away from the firehouse. It doesn't show up at the firehouse. It'd be a key point to take home.
So there are a number of risk factors, especially for public safety personnel, to experience PTSD. One of those would be adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Why don't we talk a little bit more about the risk factors for PTSD?
Okay. Yeah, good point, Ken, regarding ACEs. I personally believe a lot of firefighters get into the profession that we do because we do want to make a difference for whatever reason, however we are brought up. But when it comes to PTSD, sometimes traumatic events affect certain individuals because of maybe they came from a family of child abuse or other traumatic events when they were growing up in their formative years. And studies are showing that as they age and they don't deal with those traumatic events from their childhood, and they start seeing these continued traumatic events in their day-to-day life, it has a cumulative effect. Other risk factors are if somebody has anxiety or is prone to depression. Risk factors, drinking too much, recreational drugs, infidelity. There's all kinds of risk factors out there that contribute to PTSD. If you don't have a good support system of family or friends, you don't feel like you have anywhere to turn, these are contributing factors to PTSD. Other traumatic events that lead to PTSD are life-threatening medical diagnosis or other extreme or life-threatening events.
And like what Steve talked about is all great too, and it is a key aspect of what leads to PTSD. But PTSD is usually the end result of what Steve talked about. But there are other aspects that contribute to the stress that can build up to PTSD. You have your organizational stress, so your stress at work with your relationship with supervisors, your colleagues, your shift schedule, your work-life balance. You have professional stress, or the risk of being a firefighter, the environmental risk, the stuff that we go through, the psychological distress that entails the training, the hours, stuff like that. And then you have your community stress. So you may not be getting the social support or motivation or having that collectiveness that when we are stressed, sometimes we feel like we are, on a rock or on an island by ourselves. That combined with what Steve talked about all builds up, and then usually there's a critical incident that is kind of like the tipping point, but it's kind of like the picture of the iceberg. The incident is just the top. We have all this stuff underneath the water that is contributing to what eventually becomes PTSD.
So we've talked about what PTSD actually is, and we've talked about the signs and symptoms of what to look for with PTSD, but let's talk about how common PTSD actually is.
That's actually a very good question, Ken, because I think they're in the process of trying to figure out where that line is of what is PTSD or just stress. I mean, they talk about long-term effects. I don't think we've actually been able to put a time frame on 5, 10, 15 years of exposure. I think everybody's an individual. I think it's just recognizing the symptoms and realizing that it is a problem. Our profession it's a stressful profession. PTSD is, we are very susceptible to firefighter suicides, and that's what's kind of driving the increased focus, because we need to do a better job. Some of the most recent numbers are approximately 143 first responder suicides were reported to one organization in 2024. Problem is, the reporting is maybe 50-60% of what the actual number is. So that there's a challenge in the data collection when it comes to actually getting those numbers, because in the fire service, we constantly battle the stigma. We're the people that are called when other people need help. We are not supposed to need help. So it's very hard for us in the fire service to ask for help, and we are making a dedicated effort to try and improve those chances, but it's still a challenge, and we're going to continue to work towards making help readily available and making sure that we decrease the number of suicides and post-traumatic stress in the fire service as much as we can.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that any statistics or numbers that we do have are probably grossly underreported, because there's still that stigma, and there's still people who have these signs and symptoms that aren't getting the help they need. But via the International Association of Firefighters, one of the stats that we do have via a survey was that roughly 22% of firefighters will meet the criteria of PTSD during their career. And firefighters with PTSD are 6% more likely to attempt suicide and also have clinical depression. We're all that stuff that we've talked about earlier that we have going on, whether it's from calls or personal life, it adds up. And the coping mechanisms that you might have in a normal profession are interrupted here. We don't get good sleep. Sometimes we have poor family life because of our schedules, and that kind of stuff has built up, and people aren't reporting it. So again, any numbers that we do have are probably on the low end, but it's definitely something that is a big concern. It's, as I said, it's one of the IAFF's main points. It was their keynote topic a couple of years ago. Like they're handling cancer and mental health. So it's definitely something that as firefighters we need to do a better job of.
So since this program mostly focuses on prevention, let's talk about the prevention of PTSD. So since you are peer support, let's talk about not only what you do when dealing with somebody who has an issue, a mental health issue or PTSD, but then also how you go about passing them on to somebody with more experience and what they may do.
Well, first of all, being a peer support, especially here locally here in West Bend, being a peer supporter, the one of the big things that we practice and we preach is confidentiality. What an individual says to me when somebody comes to me looking for peer support, whatever they come to me, it stays with me. Sometimes that's something as simple as just being an ear to listen or just to talk to and kind of help somebody through a traumatic event or just a bad call, or maybe they're just having a rough time at home or with a personal. Our peer team that we do have a clinician that we have access to. So if it exceeds my capability in helping them, I have the ability to pass them off to somebody with a higher level of training if they need something. There are certain incidences that will cause me to maybe elevate things a little quicker, and that's if there's any threat of self-harm or physical harm to somebody else. But other than that, it comes down to confidentiality. I become that person that they can lean on or confide in and help them get the help that they need, especially if I can't help them, but at least I can lead them in the right direction.
Yeah, I think the other big thing as peer supporters that we do is we try to get to our co-workers in a timely manner. So anytime there's a critical incident, we really ask that we get notified so that we can come in and just listen. We want to remind people that those signs and symptoms that we talked about earlier, that's normal. And we want you to have good coping mechanisms, and we talk about coping mechanisms with them after a traumatic incident. And there's a lot of different coping mechanisms, but anything that you do that's going to make you feel better is a good coping mechanism. So like working out, if you like to woodwork, cook, things that, kind of take your mind away from the job. If video games is something you like to do, then stuff like that, meditation, relaxing, breathing. We process trauma in our sleep. So getting a good night's rest is important. It's kind of hard with what we do, but on your days off, it's really important that you try to get good sleep in because we process trauma in our sleep. And then like Steve talked about, as peer supporters, we do have access to a clinician if ultimately we think that you have moved on from PTS to full-on PTSD. We're definitely going to get you over to our clinician. And ultimately, one of the great things about our clinician is that she is EMDR certified, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's I'll say the gold standard right now for treating PTSD. Kind of like what I mentioned about earlier, that we process trauma in our sleep. The clinician is going to use eye movement similar to our REM cycle of sleep to help you process different traumas so that you can work through those emotional responses, so that you can de-escalate your feelings in a way, so that you can get that PTSD down to less signs and symptoms and acting normal where it's not impairing our function.
So one of the things that I was lucky with early on in my career was a critical incident stress debriefing for an incident that occurred in 1990 when I was 19 years old. And we had a CISD debriefing that was mandatory for the department, my volunteer department, the Butler Volunteer Fire Department, Inc. And the nice part about that is I've been able to deal with all of the issues of bad calls throughout my entire career, and knowing it's okay to talk about any of the bad calls. And we've had some pretty good support between the West Bend Fire Department and all the other agencies involved. But Steve, let's talk about critical incident stress debriefing and how effective those interventions are.
Thank you, Ken. Critical incident stress debriefing, they're CISD, CISM, they're kind of the same things, but those have morphed. They've been around for 20, 30, probably even longer years, but they've kind of morphed. And it all depends on, they've got debriefings, they've got diffusings. It all comes into the time frame that they're applied. The big thing that needs to be remembered about that stuff is you alluded to how yours was mandatory. They should never be mandatory. because individuals don't ever want to be forced. It needs to be a comfortable place to be able to talk about it. If they don't want to talk about it, the more you try to make them talk about it, the worse it's going to be. It's a private conversation just to try and vent. But these are all good things to get the events out into the open and make you realize that a lot of the emotions that you are going to feel or are feeling are perfectly normal. Critical incidents, they can be done 6-7 years after the fact and be highly effective. They've created, you're hearing of things now like tailboard talks right after a bad fire, before everybody goes back to the station. You just have a brief chat saying, hey, good job, anything we want to talk about. But it's just making sure everybody understands that it's okay to talk about what you're feeling, so you don't bury it or suppress it and end up having it resurface 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So those are just one of the steps. If you have other issues where the problem becomes really bad, we can find extra help for you. IAFF has created the Center of Excellence. It is essentially a counseling facility on the East Coast. They are in the process of building one on the West Coast, but it is a fire department support center run by firefighters. So when you go out there to talk to them, they understand what you're talking about. A lot of the times, if you go to speak with a counselor or a therapist, they don't understand 24-hour shifts. They don't understand what we deal with on a daily basis. So when you go someplace, it's nice to have somebody that understands what it's like to work 24-hour shifts, 48-hour shifts, and run 30, 40 calls in a 48-hour span.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about PTSD and the Center of Excellence. We also talk about co-occurring disorders. Co-occurring disorders are a mental health disorder that also occurs at the same time as a substance use disorder, so drugs and alcohol. 46% of firefighters with a mental health disorder also have a substance use disorder. And the great thing about the Center of Excellence is that they tackle your mental health aspect and your substance abuse aspect, not exactly at the same time, but one after the other. And they put you in an environment where it is familiar to you. So you're in a firehouse. You have your recliner, you have your day room, you have your bunk room, your chow, and the dinner table. The great thing about any fire station is the dinner table. Steve alluded to your tailboard talks. That's just an informal diffusing. So one of the steps of a CISD is if you, after the incident, before you go to bed, you have the stage where you can do a diffusing and you just talk about the incident and how it went and how you're feeling. We do that all the time as firefighters. We do it in the tailboard talk or at the kitchen table. We review how it went, and it's getting to the point, and it's a really good point where you talk about how you're feeling. Like, you talk about what went well, what went bad, and then you start sharing about how you're feeling about it, and that's great because that does help prevent PTSD down the road and may lead to the fact maybe we don't need to do a debriefing because you did the good diffusing. All that stuff is great, and the IAFF has been pushing for that. Again, we're building another center on the West Coast, and it's great to have people who know the firefighter schedule, and you can go out there and be in that environment that we know.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alec, about the routines in the Center of Excellence. I know that some of the people I've gone out there, they loved the fact that there are house duties and other duties during the day, as well as the therapy sessions, everything like that. Why don't we talk about how important those routines actually are?
Yeah, like we brought up earlier, a lot of times what we use the firehouse is where we are sometimes the most normal, where it's a place for us to almost escape. So having a duty day or a routine, because that's what we are used to when we come to work, based on the day of the week or the shift day of the month, however your department runs it, you kind of know what you're going to do that day, minus running the calls. So like the day-to-day activities are spelled out for you, and for a lot of people, that's just a good base to have, and it gives them something to do to help pass the time through the day, and then they can also look forward to it outside of their counseling sessions. And we talk about the Center of Excellence. There are lots of other places that are helping first responders too, such as Rosecrans and some other ones. We just are very familiar with the IAFF Center of Excellence as IAFF peer supporters. But it is really growing, and the way we treat first responders is becoming a lot better. And what part of that is having these daily routines and treating it almost like a firehouse.
So this has been a really great discussion about PTSD and mental health awareness and prevention of mental health issues and PTSD. So do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
I just want to say thank you for taking the time to shine a light on this very worthwhile topic. When I got into the fire service over 25 years ago, we all come in with the same bravado, but at the end of the day, I always wanted to leave it better than I found it. I came into a great profession that was left to me by my predecessors, and that was always been my goal. And I'm very excited to see the fire service embracing mental health, because it is such an impactful, important part of our job moving forward. And I think we're providing the young new members that are coming in great tools. There again, they need to know that the tools are there for them, the support is there for them, if and when they want it. And that's part of it, is just making sure that we reduce the stigma, bring mental health to the forefront, and it's not a crutch, it's not a boogeyman. It's a real concern with the fire service, or in all protective services, I should say, when it comes to doing this job. We are called in on a person's worst day to make it better. That has long-term effects on us also. So we just need to understand that and need to embrace it and deal with it head on.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, thanks for talking with us. It's great anytime we can talk about mental health, and the more we talk about it, the more the stigma breaks down. I always like to end with resources. So we've talked about the Center of Excellence. If you're an IAFF member, it's a great resource. Center of Excellence. They also have a crisis number, Fire Strong, which is for family members. And then lastly, if anytime you're feeling like you need to talk to someone or you need to reach out with one, you feel like you're going to harm yourself, talking suicide, there's a suicide crisis hotline. Text or call 988.
We would like to thank Steve Inhof and Alec Hakes for joining us on this episode. For more information on PTSD Awareness Month, you can visit ptsd.va.gov. Join us on our next episode when we talk with Chris Bagaski from WiscoNet about Lightning Safety Awareness Week. WPLG 715, Fireman Kenny's returning to quarters. The best weather is on the way, and the best way to enjoy it is with friends and family on the water. Whether it's fishing, tubing, or cruising, we have the perfect boat for you. Cedar Lake Sales has over 20,000 square feet of indoor showroom space and over 100 new and used boats to choose from. Quality brands like Crestliner, Bentley Pontoons, Yarcraft, Basscat, and Camus, all powered by Mercury Motors. Make memories on the water this summer at Cedar Lake Sales. View the inventory and specials at cedarlakesales.com.